And now we're going to talk a bit about color in web design. So we've already looked at some examples so we know why color is so important. Here we're going to talk about the theory for how we can think about color to make sure that what we're doing with our websites are going to be beautiful. So first of all, consider where this fits in the whole semester of web design principles. If we look at this as a list of 9 different things that we're going to address directly, you can see that we're here in week 2 looking at color. In week 4, we're going to look at visual hierarchy in a bit more depth. And we're also going to look at user-centered design. Week 5, we're going to get into user-centered content. And then later on in the semester, we're going to get into information architecture and the mobile web. For today though, color. As a side note, you might have seen some of these images of the Castelliers. I was lucky enough to spend second semester in 2018 doing research over in Catalonia, which is where this is taking place. And the reason for this image, partly, is that with these teams, there is a team from each town, and the color of the teams lets you know who's on which team. And so this is a huge event that takes place each year down in Tarragona, which is the finals of the competition to see who can build the biggest towers. Which is quite an amazing event as a shiny example of what happens when humans work together and the need for diversity to create strength. That's another story. For now though, color lets you see the difference between things as well as making things look beautiful. So it's this function and aesthetics are both present when we talk about color. So a good example of how color works is to look at the web without color. So what have we got here? Right there, you're looking at the Google front page without color. And it kind of just looks like a sea of text when you see it like this. So let's start adding some color back in. All of a sudden, we can see that this yellow rectangle is drawing our eyes, saying, these are the first things you should look at. The red of the web is letting us know where we are within the site navigation. And of course, the Google logo is letting us know what website we're on. Adding in a little bit more color, what do you see now? You can see that the links have now been added, where the dark blue is a hyperlink and the purple is a hyperlink that has been clicked. So all of a sudden, from a usability perspective, the user immediately knows through convention which parts of the site they're able to interact with. And then finally, we've got the actual domain names in green. So there's this extra layer of information overlaid where you know where the link's going to take you, and the color green indicates that that's some pretty important text. So just on the Google front page, we can already start to see that colors are serving a real functional purpose. And you can consider any of your favorite websites from this same lens. So in addition to this functional purpose, it's not as if all colors are equal. Each color tells a story. I mean, there are some people whose whole careers are advising on which colors to use in different situations. There's a reason why every fast food joint tends to have red somewhere in their color scheme, because it speaks to our hunger and tends to sell more food. And similarly, every color within the palette tells its own story. And you may be familiar with the division between hot and cool colors as one of the more gross distinctions. But then at all levels, there's a whole field of psychology that looks at, funnily enough, the psychology of color. So when we're designing, we really want to make sure that the colors that we choose fit our audience, right? This is the point of design, is making sure that what we're creating is appropriate for the needs of the people we're creating it for. So colors convey emotion and they have their own hierarchy. So depending on which colors are together, some of them will stand out. If you have a whole palette of muted colors and one bright color, that's going to jump right out at you. And if you start working with contrasting colors, then they'll change their relationship according to each other. So let's get into a little bit more of the theory here. All right, talking about color. First of all, we use the word palette to talk about all of the colors on your website. So in the industry, you might hear someone say, I'm just trying to figure out the palette for this new website I'm designing for a client. This is the decision of picking the set of 3 to 5 colors that you're going to reuse consistently across the design. Remember some of those good websites that I showed you back in the last video? A lot of those websites, were using a consistent palette. And also, it's often hidden from view, but a lot of thought has gone into making sure that the emotional impact of the color fits with the site content and fits with the audience. So here are 2 great examples of where the colors fit with the content. And of course, you can see here that each color can be represented as a 6 character hexadecimal code. So we can talk more about the details of that, but effectively what those 6 characters are showing is 2 characters for each of red, green, and blue, where that's ranging through from 0 to 256 for each one. And so you put that together and you end up with a whole palette of colors. I should also add that typically at university, color design would be an entire unit of study. So it's worth remembering that we're just going to be scratching the surface here. But for now, the main thing to note is that when you look at a website, start to pay attention to the fact that there's a palette that's gone into the design of each one, and that you can actually start collecting the examples that work for you and learning from them. That's how we become better designers, through using case studies and learning the tricks that other people have shown to work. So, all right, let's get a bit deeper into the theory. Who is familiar with the color wheel? All right, I can see a chorus of hands going up in the imagined lecture of my mind. So color, of course, we're probably all familiar with the idea that light, the visible light spectrum, is made up of all of the different colors from red, orange, yellow, green, etc. But another way of thinking about color is also as additive color, the ways in which you can mix different paints together to create other colors. And when you sort of lay out the colors on a wheel based on the way that they come together to create other colors, you end up with what you see there in the image of the color wheel, which is a really helpful way not just to represent the colors, but also to represent the relationships between them. So we can talk about primary colors as if you are mixing paint, for example. If you've got the primary colors as red, yellow, and blue, then you can theoretically mix any other color in the entire spectrum using those. Secondary colors are what you get when you combine any 2 of the primary colors. So that's where you get green and orange and purple. And finally, tertiary colors are what you get when you combine 1 primary and 1 secondary color. So these are just some terms to make sure that you're familiar with. I'm sure most of you already are. And then, of course, as mentioned, we talk about warm colors and cool colors, where they each have their own emotional response. And just pause for a second to think about, where are these colors often found in nature? Because remember, as humans, we've evolved in nature, and so a lot of our perceptual systems are attuned to have an emotional response that fits with the different situations that we might find in nature. And so armed with a bit of this theory and understanding of what the color wheel is, we can start to think about when you've got this question of which color goes with which other color, you can actually use theory to answer that. So something that's very commonly used is the idea of complementary colors. If you know that you want to work with a particular shade of red, if you go right across to the opposite side of the color wheel and get a shade of green that sits directly opposite it, then those will be complementary. And you can construct a palette around complementary colors. And I'll show you in a minute a way of doing that. Similarly, you could also do it based on analogous colors. Again, coming back to nature, when you look at a forest, often there's different shades of green that are all found together. And perhaps for this reason, humans can find a palette that's made of analogous colors to be very pleasing to the eye. Another approach is the triadic palette, where you take 3 different colors that are evenly spaced out around the wheel. So they might be the 3 primary colors, for example, are evenly spaced out, but they need not be. And there are plenty of other ways to navigate the color wheel, and some examples here are shown below, such as split complementary colors, rectangular or square. And there are plenty of websites if you're interested to read further. Here's a link. So, as with so many things, the good folk at Adobe have created what's really quite a fantastic tool for working with color, and I really recommend that you play around with it. In fact, you might want to pause this video and just go to color.adobe.com. I'm no salesman for Adobe, but this is a totally free tool. And what it lets you do is choose any one of these different harmony rules, and then you can just play around within the color wheel. If you can drag those little circles around and find a palette that works for you, guided by the algorithms, and just have a play. Have a look at the analogous color schemes, have a look at the triads, complementary, and see what kind of works for you. Start to get your own feel. Because remember, there's no right or wrong answer in color design. There's what works for you, there's what works for the person you're designing for, and there's doing a lot of work to play around and figure that out. So another feature, if you're trying to think from first principles about what colors you're going to use in your website, is to use this one up here, extract from an image. So if you click on that, you can upload any image of anything that you like. Adobe has an algorithm there that will pick out the main features and the colors and then construct a palette based upon your image. So this was an image I took while I was out walking around Girraween, and so as a result I've got a very earthy palette from it of browns and greens. And you can play around with this. So take a photo in any environment that you find interesting, import it into Adobe through the color website, and then take those hex values and plug them into your CSS. And you'll be learning in the tutorials how to do that. So again, these are the hex values, and you'll be seeing exactly where to use those and how to use them, but feel free to have a play now, or if this is familiar to you. All right, so that's the bulk of the theory of color that we're going to be working with. As with anything in theory and design, it only makes sense once you play with it. So I'd encourage you, I guess the ideal way to study some of these concepts is take notes on the things that you think might be useful, and then in the tutorials, play around with them. Play around with the different color schemes, play around with palettes to get a feel for how it works for you, and start to get a feeling of what expertise in this space feels like. And I do love the image on the background of this slide as an example of expertise in the domain of color. All right, so there are plenty of examples on the web. Again, I'd urge you now, when you go to any website that you like, to have a look at the way that color has been used to create a feeling. Is it aiming for an institutional vibe of trust and longevity? Is it aiming for some kind of friendly, warm, feel-good, comforting vibe? Is it trying to be edgy and a little bit out there? What is the website trying to say with color? Does it work? And what can you learn from that? And so I've talked about taking photos and then importing them, but it also works in the opposite direction, right? So let's imagine that you've decided upon your palette and you know exactly what color scheme you want to work with. All right, now you want to put an image on your website that reflects that color scheme. I think the Commonwealth Bank example that I used a couple of videos ago, they have that yellow color as their main, that is what the Commonwealth Bank color is. So that's a situation where you want to make sure you have images that match your color scheme. And so what's very handy is that Google allows you to search images by color. So you could take your palette, get the color that you're aiming for, and Google will show you the images that fit with that. And that's just by using the image search in Google. Again, something to play around with, really, really useful. If you want to go a bit deeper into the theory, a way that it's applied is in the design system that's known as Google's material design. So this is kind of an entire world of design that Google has invested a lot in creating, of what Google considers to be good design. And there's some really good theory behind what they've created here. So that's one to have a read through, because a lot of the web has adopted the material design principles. And once you've read it, then you'll start noticing it everywhere. But again, there is always two sides to everything. And so in this case, Google's trying to impose a certain set of standards on web design. For example, when it comes to what makes well-formed HTML, they have their own opinion that doesn't fit with certain other opinions. And so it's always a trade-off. But I really do think that a lot of the design principles they're using here have shown to be excellent principles. All right, and that's it on color for today. Main thing is play around with this in the tutorial, please. And here's some further reading if you want to go deeper. And as always, this will be up on the WordPress website. These original slides will be up there as well, in case you want to click a link and you're finding it difficult to do on the video. And as always, shoot me an email if anything doesn't make sense, or even if you just want to give me some feedback on these videos. I'd really appreciate it. Engagement is encouraged. All right, thank you.